The end of the world didn't have a sound. It had a smell. A cloying, sweet note of decay I'd never cataloged before. And I, a perfumer, was the only one who noticed it coming. Day 1. The end of the world didn't have a sound. It had a smell. A cloying, sweet note of decay I'd never cataloged before, layered over an aggressive, ozonic bass, like shattered electronics after a lightning strike. I was, a perfumer. My name is Alistair. My world wasn't one of survival, but of subtlety. Of the 10,000 distinct scents a trained human nose can identify, I dealt in memories and emotions, bottled in glass. Jasmine for a first love, vetiver for a stern father, ambergris for the echo of the ocean. My atelier on the 3rd floor of a historic downtown building was a temple to the ephemeral. That morning, the smell was the first thing that felt wrong. It was faint, carried on the breeze through my open window, but it was insistent. It was a chord of wrongness in the symphony of the city, the usual petrichor from the morning rain, the comforting aroma of roasting coffee from the cafe below, the metallic tang of traffic. This new scent was an intruder. It was the smell of a flower blooming and rotting in the same instant. I tried to deconstruct it, as is my nature. Aldehydic, certainly. A hint of endo, that molecule present in both jasmine and in death. But there was something else, something synthetic and sharp. I spent the morning unsettled, unable to focus on my latest composition, a commission for a bride who wanted to smell of sea salt and new beginnings. By noon, the sirens began. Not the usual call and response of a single incident, but a chorus, a discordant orchestra of panic from every direction. I went to the large arched window of my studio, looking down on the street. Chaos. Cars skewed at impossible angles, people running, their screams too distant to be distinct. And then I saw the first of them, a man in a business suit, lurching, stumbling with a broken, unnatural gait. He wasn't running from the danger. He was the danger. He fell upon a woman who had tripped on the curb, and the scent, dear God, the scent intensified, flooding the air, a plume of that rotten floral miasma so thick I could almost taste it. I recoiled from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs. This wasn't a riot. This was something else. This was the full stop at the end of a sentence I didn't even know was being written. My first instinct was not for a weapon, but for my library. My tinctures, my absolutes, my essential oils. My entire life was cataloged in these brown glass bottles. I began to seal the studio. I locked the heavy oak door, dragged a display cabinet of antique atomizers in front of it. I taped the window seams, not against a gas, but against a smell, against the very air itself. This was my fortress of fragrance, my sanctuary of scent. For 2 days, I subsisted on protein bars I kept for long work nights and the filtered water from my cooler. The world outside was a cacophony of screams, sirens, and eventually a terrifying silence punctuated by guttural moans. I became a ghost in my own life, listening to the death of the world on the radio until the broadcasts turned to static. This full zombie story was just beginning, and I was trapped on the 3rd floor. On the morning of day 3, the twist I never could have imagined presented itself. The power had failed overnight, and with it, the quiet hum of my climate control system. The silence was absolute. And in that silence, I heard a new sound. A wet, sniffling, snuffling sound from the hallway outside my door. It wasn't a groan. It wasn't a snarl. It was the sound of something smelling, inhaling deeply. I froze, my hand hovering over a bottle of Bulgarian Rosado. The sniffling grew more frantic right at the crack beneath my door. And then a low, guttural moan of what I could only describe as frustration. It was then that the pieces clicked into place in my terrified mind. The scent, the unnatural way they moved, not by sight, but seemingly by some other sense. They didn't see their prey. They didn't hear it. They smelled it. They smelled the living. The carbon dioxide we exhale, the oils on our skin, the faint but distinct aroma of warm blood pumping through our veins. The apocalypse wasn't just a plague of the undead, it was a plague of olfactory hunters. And I, a man whose entire being was steeped in the most potent and complex scents on the planet, was a lighthouse in a sea of darkness, a beacon for the dead. My sanctuary was not a fortress, it was a trap. My perfumes, my life's work, were a dinner bell. This wasn't just a post-apocalyptic survival story, it was a cruel, cosmic joke. The very thing that defined me was now the thing most likely to get me killed. The creature in the hall eventually shuffled away, losing my trail in the complex bouquet of residual scents in the old building. But I knew it was a temporary reprieve. I looked at my wall of fragrances, hundreds of them, my art, my passion, and I realized they had to become my weapons, my camouflage, my survival. The perfumer was no more. A new profession was about to be born from the ashes, one that would blend the art of scent with the brutal science of staying alive for the next 42 days. Day 4. Fear has a scent. It's not just a metaphor, it's a chemical reaction. A sharp, acrid note of adrenaline and cold sweat, with a base of cortisol that lingers long after the danger has passed. For the past 24 hours, that has been my personal fragrance. I've been living in a state of suspended terror, barely breathing, analyzing every creak of the floorboards, every distant moan. The creature from yesterday is gone, but the knowledge it left behind has poisoned my sanctuary. My studio, once a place of creation, now feels like a tomb waiting for its occupant. I spent the day conducting a frantic inventory, but not of my valuable absolutes or rare tinctures. I was looking for my mistakes, my failures, the discordant, foul-smelling experiments that every perfumer creates on the path to beauty. In a locked metal cabinet, I found them. A vial of pure scato, the molecule that gives feces its characteristic odor, but is paradoxically used in trace amounts to add a floral note to jasmine. A beaker of synthetic civet, musky and fecal. Another of cadaverine and putrescine, chemicals I'd been studying for a morbid art project, attempting to replicate the scent of true decay. I used to call them my olfactory palette of the grotesque. Now they were my only hope. My theory was simple, born of pure desperation. If they hunt by the scent of the living, could I mask it with the scent of the dead? Could I create an anti-perfume? A fragrance of rot and ruin that would make me olfactorily invisible to the things outside? This became my singular obsession. It was a terrifying perversion of my art. Instead of balancing top notes, heart notes, and bass notes to create harmony, I was now seeking to create a symphony of pure horror. I worked with a surgeon's precision, my hands trembling as I used my pipettes and glass beakers. I started with a base of geosmin, the compound that gives soil its earthy after-the-rain smell. It's a scent of the earth, of the grave. To this, I added a touch of mushroom aldehyde for a damp fungal accord. Then came the hard part. I added a micro droplet of putrescine. The studio, which usually smelled of rosewood and bergamot, was instantly filled with a stomach-turning stench of rotting flesh. I gagged, my eyes watering, but I forced myself to continue. This was survival horror narration in its most literal form. I was narrating my own survival, one horrifying drop at a time. Day 5. The silence from outside is a lie. It's not peace. It's a held breath. I can still hear them, the faint, shuffling, dragging sounds from the street below. A constant, low-level reminder of the new world order. Today, I tested my creation. I couldn't risk using it on myself, not yet. I found a small battery-operated desk fan. I took a strip of blotter paper, the kind I used to test fragrances, and dipped it into the foul concoction. I opened the mail slot in my heavy oak door, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The hallway was dark, silent. I pushed the scented blotter through the slat, letting it fall to the floor outside. Then I waited. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. I began to think I was mad, that my theory was the product of a sleep-deprived, terrified mind. Then I heard it. The slow, wet shuffle, the sniffling. It was one of them, drawn by some other scent in the building. It moved down the hall, its heavy, dragging footsteps echoing in the stairwell. I held my breath, my eye pressed to the peephole. A figure emerged from the gloom, a woman in what looked like a nurse's uniform, her face a mask of gray decay. She shuffled past my door, then stopped. She turned her head, not as if she saw something, but as if she'd caught a scent on the wind. She sniffed the air, her head tilting. She took a step towards my door, then another. My blood ran cold. But then she stopped again, right over the spot where the blotter had fallen. She sniffed the floor, a long, deep inhalation. A shudder ran through her body. She recoiled, a low groan rumbling in her chest. She turned and shuffled away, moving faster now, as if to escape the smell. It worked. My God, it actually worked. I sank to the floor, a wave of relief so profound it left me weak. I had created a repellent, a shield made of stench. It was the single greatest creation of my life, and it smelled like the bottom of a tomb. Day 6. The euphoria of my success has faded, replaced by the grim reality of my situation. My death perfume works, but it's a finite resource. I have perhaps enough to create a liter of the foul stuff. And what then? I can't stay here forever. My food is running out. The water in the cooler is down to its last few inches. The building is a vertical tomb, and I'm just a prisoner on a higher floor. I must get out. I must find supplies. I must find other survivors, if any are left. The thought is paralyzing. To leave my sanctuary, to walk among them, it seems impossible. But to stay here is to choose a slow, certain death. So today, I planned. I spent the entire day turning my studio into a different kind of workshop. My perfumer's tools became survival gear. My sturdy leather apron, meant to protect from chemical spills, would be my armor against scratches. I emptied my briefcase, filling it not with scent samples, but with my remaining protein bars, a bottle of water, and a small, heavy glass paperweight, my only weapon. And of course, a small atomizer filled with it.I'm, as I'd morbidly named it. I also prepared my clothes. I took an old set of coveralls and soaked them in a diluted solution of the repellent. The smell was unbearable. I had to wear a filtration mask just to handle them. The plan is to leave at dawn. Dawn seems to be the quietest time. Perhaps their olfactory senses are dulled by the morning dew, the changing air pressure. A foolish hope, perhaps, but it's the only one I have. I will douse myself in the scent of death and walk among the dead. The irony is not lost on me. I, who spent a lifetime creating scents to attract, to entice, to evoke beauty, must now cloak myself in the very essence of repulsion to survive. This is my full zombie story, a narrative written in molecules of rot. Day 7, the 7th day. Biblically, a day of rest. For me, it was a day of rebirth, into a world I no longer recognized. I woke before the sun, the gray pre-dawn light filtering through the grimy windows. The silence of the city was profound, a heavy blanket of dread. I donned the stiff, stinking coveralls. The smell was so potent it made my stomach churn, even through the mask. It clung to me, a greasy, foul film. I sprayed my boots, my gloves, my hair. I was no longer Alistair, the perfumer. I was a walking corpse, a ghost in the machine. With a final look at my beautiful, useless studio, I unlocked the door. The hallway was empty. The air was stale, thick with the scent of dust and something else. That floral rot, the signature scent of the infected. It was fainter here, a ghost of a smell. Armed with my briefcase and paperweight, I moved towards the stairwell. Every step was a thunderclap in the silence. The stairs were dark, and I took them one at a time, my hand trailing along the gritty wall. On the second-floor landing, I saw the first one. It was slumped against the wall, a man in a courier's uniform. He was dormant, still. I froze, my body screaming at me to run, but I held my ground. I remembered my theory. I was invisible. I was one of them. I took a slow, deliberate step past him. His head lolled in my direction. A low sniff. I could see his nostrils flare. He smelled me. But he smelled the death I was wearing, not the life underneath. His head dropped back to his chest. He dismissed me. I continued down, my heart a frantic drum. The lobby was a scene of carnage. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, and 3 more of them milling about in a slow, aimless circle. They were sniffing the air, their heads turning this way and that, like hounds seeking a scent. I had to walk through them. It was the single hardest thing I have ever done. I focused on my breathing, keeping it slow and shallow. I walked with a steady, even pace, not too fast, not too slow. I was just another piece of debris in their dead world. One of them, a woman with a horribly dislocated jaw, turned as I passed. Her dead eyes seemed to look right through me. She sniffed, her whole body tensing. She took a shuffling step towards me. This is it, I thought. My theory was wrong. But then she stopped, groaned in that frustrated way I'd heard before, and turned away, drawn by some other, more distant, more living scent. I reached the heavy glass doors of the entrance. Pushing one open, the sound seemed deafening. And then I was outside. The air hit me like a physical blow. The smell of the city, it was 1,000 times worse out here. It was a charnel house. The streets were littered with abandoned cars and the dead, both the walking and the truly dead. And through it all, I walked. A perfumer, cloaked in the scent of decay, taking his first steps into the zombie apocalypse. I had survived 1 week, only 5 more to go. The post-apocalyptic survival story of Alistair, the perfumer, had truly begun. Day 8. The city is a graveyard with a pulse, a slow, shuffling, moaning pulse. Walking through the streets is a waking nightmare. The trick, I've learned, is to control my scent profile. It's not just about wearing the eau de mort, it's about managing the living scent I produce. I have to control my breathing, keeping my exhalation shallow to minimize the CO2 signature. I have to avoid sweating, which means moving at a slow, deliberate pace, no matter how much my instincts scream at me to run. I am a walking exercise in olfactory stealth. My destination today was the public library. It seemed an absurd choice. What use are books in a world of monsters? But I wasn't there for the books. I was there for the chemicals. Libraries, especially old ones, are a treasure trove of scents and, more importantly, the materials that create them. Bookbinding glue, archival sprays, cleaning solvents, the slow decay of acidic paper, it's a complex chemical landscape. My hope was to find materials to synthesize more of my repellent. My current supply was finite, and each application felt like using up a day of my life. The library was 5 blocks from my studio. It felt like 100 miles. I moved through the herds of the dead like a phantom. They are everywhere. They cluster, they wander, they stand dormant for hours. Their behavior is still a mystery, but their driving force is not. They are constantly sniffing, constantly hunting for that one discordant note in the symphony of decay, the scent of life. I saw things that will haunt me forever. A small cluster of them gathered around a playground, their heads cocked as if listening for a sound that wasn't there. A lone one walking repeatedly into a glass storefront, drawn by the faint, lingering scent of the people who had hidden inside days ago. Reaching the library was a relief. The grand stone building was silent. Its heavy doors were slightly ajar. I slipped inside, my heart in my throat. The air inside was thick with the beloved scent of old paper and dust. It was the smell of my childhood. For a moment, it was easy to forget the horrors outside, but only for a moment. In the grand reading room, under a magnificent domed ceiling, were more of them. At least a dozen, shuffling aimlessly between the long oak tables. They were trapped, having wandered in and now unable to navigate their way out. This was my first real test of the repellent in an enclosed space. I reapplied a light mist of it to my coveralls from the atomizer in my pocket. The stench bloomed around me, and I walked into the room. They turned, one by one, their dead eyes fixing on me. Their nostrils flared. A chorus of low, guttural groans filled the space. They were agitated. The scent of my repellent was strong here, an irritant. It was like shouting in a quiet room. They didn't recognize me as prey, but they recognized me as an anomaly, a foul presence that didn't belong. They began to move towards me, not with the speed of a hunt, but with the slow, deliberate pace of eviction. They wanted the source of the foul smell gone. I had made a terrible miscalculation. The repellent wasn't just camouflage, it was also an irritant. In the open air, it dissipated. Here, it concentrated, turning me from an invisible man into a walking chemical weapon that was drawing the worst kind of attention. I began to back away, moving slowly towards the staff-only door behind the main circulation desk. This was no longer a simple supply run. This was a survival horror narration playing out in real time, and I was the terrified protagonist. Day 9. I spent the night in the library's basement, huddled in a dusty records room. The dead shuffled and moaned on the floor above me for hours before the building fell silent again. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old building was a monster in the dark. At dawn, I began my search. The basement was a maze of shelves and forgotten things, and I found what I was looking for in a small, locked janitor's closet. Industrial cleaning supplies, ammonia, bleach, strong, aggressive chemicals with overpowering scents. They weren't the complex organic compounds I needed, but they were a start. More importantly, in the archival section, I found it. A box labeled "for pest control." Inside were small packets of sulfur. Sulfur, when burned, creates sulfur dioxide, a pungent, choking gas. But unburned, its compounds, like thiols, are famously responsible for the smells of skunks and rotting eggs. It was a key ingredient. I could work with this. I spent the day in a small, windowless conservation lab, the door barricaded with a heavy metal filing cabinet. I was back in my element in a way. I had glassware, a hot plate, and raw materials. I began to experiment, trying to synthesize a new, more stable version of my repellent. One that was less of an aggressive irritant and more of a passive camouflage. I was trying to replicate the precise scent of long-term decay, not the fresh, volatile stench that had agitated the dead in the reading room. It was delicate, dangerous work. Mixing ammonia and bleach, for instance, would create chloramine gas, which would kill me faster than any zombie. I had to be meticulous. I had to remember my chemistry. I had to be a perfumer again, but with the highest stakes imaginable. As I worked, I thought about the irony of it all. People always asked me what the most beautiful smell in the world was. I'd tell them it was a matter of context. The smell of rain on dry earth, petrichor, is beautiful because it signals the end of a drought. The smell of a newborn's head is beautiful because it's the scent of pure, new life. Now I knew what the most beautiful smell in the world truly was. It was the smell that meant you would live another day. And right now, that smell was a carefully balanced concoction of sulfur, ammonia, and the dusty essence of decay. Day 10. A breakthrough. By combining a sulfur compound with a controlled ammonia reaction and a base of denatured alcohol I found in the lab, I created what I'm calling Geist Note. It's far more subtle than odor. It doesn't scream rotting flesh. It whispers, "Long dead, nothing to see here." It has the dry, dusty scent of bone and old earth, with a faint, sour undertone that mimics the slow breakdown of tissue without being overtly aggressive. It's a scent of absence, the scent of something that is no longer a threat, no longer food. I tested it by scenting a piece of paper and leaving it on the floor of the lab. I then cracked the door open. One of the dead was still wandering the basement corridors. It shuffled past my door, sniffing the air. It paused, its head tilting. It sniffed again, right at the crack in the door. But there was no agitation, no groan of irritation. It simply registered the scent, categorized it as not food, and moved on. This was it. This was the key, not just to my survival, but to my ability to move through this new world. I could become a ghost. I spent the rest of the day producing as much of it as I could, filling every small bottle and container I could find. My original repellent was a desperate shout. Geist Note was a quiet, confident lie. Day 12. I've been in the library for 4 days. The supplies I found are a boon, but I've also found something else: information. In the staff break room, I found a collection of newspapers from the first 2 days of the outbreak. The official story was a fast-spreading virus, a mutated form of rabies. They called it the Cerberus virus. The articles spoke of confusion, overwhelmed hospitals, and martial law being declared. But it was the small, buried details that caught my eye. Reports of strange animal behavior in the days leading up to it, birds falling from the sky, mass die-offs of fish, and a strange recurring mention of an unusual atmospheric haze with a faint, sweet smell. They had smelled it too, but they hadn't understood. They didn't have the vocabulary. That floral, rotten scent, it wasn't a byproduct of the infected, it was the vector, an airborne agent that spread the plague. It rewrote the senses, destroying higher brain function and leaving only the most primal instinct, the hunt. And it hypersensitized the olfactory system, turning the infected into the ultimate scent hounds. This changes everything. It means the air itself is a potential enemy. It means that there is no safe place, only places that are less contaminated. It also means the source of the plague is still out there, somewhere in the city, likely still producing this horrific airborne perfume. My mission has changed. It's no longer just about survival, it's about understanding. If I can understand the scent, perhaps I can understand the plague. And perhaps, just perhaps, I can find a way to create a counteragent. A scent that doesn't just repel, but cures. It's a mad thought, the rambling of a lonely, terrified man in a dead world. But it's the first spark of hope I've felt in 10 days. It's a purpose. Day 14. 2 weeks. 14 days since the world ended. Today, I leave the library. I am better equipped now. I have a small backpack with my new Geist Note repellent, a fire axe I found in a utility closet, a map of the city, and a new, terrifying purpose. The city seems quieter today. The number of walking dead seems to have thinned out, but the ones that remain seem more focused, more patient. The initial frenzy has passed, and they have settled into their new horrific existence. As I walked down the silent avenues, cloaked in my scent of dust and bone, I felt a profound sense of loneliness. The world is so full of these creatures, yet I have never felt more alone. Every building is a potential tomb, every car a potential hiding place for a monster. I am a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life. I passed my favorite cafe, its windows shattered, a single cup still sitting on an outdoor table. I passed the theater where I'd had my first date, its marquee advertising a movie that would never be seen. Each landmark was a fresh wound. This is the true nature of this post-apocalyptic survival story. It's not just about avoiding the monsters, it's about surviving the crushing weight of what you've lost. As dusk began to fall, I found a new place to shelter, a small, independent bookstore. It felt fitting, from a library of knowledge to a haven of stories. As I barricaded the door for the night, I caught a new scent on the wind. It was faint but unmistakable. Lavender. Strong, pure, natural lavender. It was impossible. There were no lavender fields in the middle of the city. It was a clean, beautiful scent in a world of filth and decay. And it was coming from the north. Where there is a scent, there is a source. And tomorrow, I will hunt it. For the first time, I am not running from something. I am walking towards it. I have survived 2 weeks. I am no longer just a victim. I am a hunter too. Day 15. The scent of lavender was my compass. In a world rendered meaningless, a single, clear scent was a true north. I followed it through the debris-choked streets, a strange pilgrim on an olfactory quest. The Geist note worked its magic. I moved through the shuffling dead like a whisper, my presence registered and then immediately dismissed. They were searching for the rich, complex scent of living meat, not the dry, sterile note of old bones that I wore. The lavender scent grew stronger as I moved north, block by block. It was pure, unadulterated Lavandula angustifolia. I could even pick out the subtle camphoraceous undertones. It was real. It had to be. This wasn't some lingering perfume from a shattered department store. This had a living source. The trail led me to a tall, pre-war apartment building, one of those elegant structures with a marble lobby and wrought iron details. The source was clearly high up. I entered the building, my axe held ready. The lobby was eerily clean, but silent. I took the stairs, not trusting the silent, waiting elevators. Each floor was a new chapter in a sad, silent book. A child's toy in a hallway, an overturned grocery bag, its contents spilled. The faint, lingering scent of the last meals cooked. On the 12th floor, I found the source. The door to the rooftop access was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, I was met with a wave of scent so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. Lavender, yes, but also rosemary, mint, and the sharp green scent of tomato vines. I stepped out onto the roof and stopped dead. The entire rooftop was a garden. A lush, thriving, impossible garden in the heart of a dead city. Wooden planters were overflowing with herbs, vegetables, and flowers. A simple but effective rainwater collection system fed a series of irrigation tubes. And in the center of it all, tending to a row of tomato plants, was a woman. She was perhaps in her 70s, with a cascade of white hair tied back in a practical bun. She wore overalls and held a small trowel. She didn't see me at first. And then she turned, and her eyes, sharp and blue, widened in shock. She raised the trowel like a weapon. "Stay back," she said, her voice raspy but firm. I held up my hands, my axe still held in one, a gesture that was probably less reassuring than I intended. "I'm not one of them," I said, my own voice feeling alien in my throat. "How?" she asked, her eyes narrowing. "How did you get past them? They're all over the street." I pointed to the small atomizer in my pocket. "A trick, a scent trick." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite read. Curiosity? Disbelief? "A perfumer," I added, by way of explanation. It sounded absurd, even to me. She lowered the trowel slightly. "My name is Eleanor," she said, "and you are trespassing in my garden." Day 16. Eleanor is a force of nature. A retired botanist, she had been building this rooftop oasis for over a decade. When the world fell apart, she had everything she needed: food, water, and a formidable knowledge of self-sufficiency. She had barricaded the stairwell door 2 floors below with heavy furniture, effectively sealing herself off from the world. She hadn't spoken to another living soul in 2 weeks. She was wary of me, and rightly so. In this new world, the living are often more dangerous than the dead. I spent the day explaining my journey, my theory about the scent-based nature of the infected. She listened intently, her botanist's mind absorbing and analyzing. She had noticed their strange sniffing behavior, but hadn't made the connection. "It makes a horrifying kind of sense," she admitted, looking out over the edge of the roof at the shuffling figures below. "A predator that has evolved to hunt its specific prey with ruthless efficiency." I showed her my Geist note. She recoiled at the smell, but she understood the science immediately. "You've masked the scent of a living mammal with the scent of decomposition. You've hidden yourself in plain sight. It's brilliant." Coming from this stoic, pragmatic woman, the praise felt like a validation of my entire insane journey. We are an unlikely pair, the perfumer and the botanist. The man who deconstructs scent and the woman who cultivates it. We spent the afternoon in a strange kind of symbiosis. I helped her weed a bed of stubborn dandelions, and in return, she gave me a fresh tomato. I have not tasted real food in weeks. The explosion of flavor, the perfect balance of acid and sugar, was so overwhelming I almost wept. It was the taste of life, the taste of the world that was. In this small green sanctuary, surrounded by the beautiful living scents of her garden, it was almost possible to believe that the world below wasn't real. But it was, and it was waiting. Day 18. We have fallen into a routine. By day, we work in the garden. Eleanor teaches me the names of plants, the rhythm of their growth, the science of soil and sun. I, in turn, teach her about the world of scent. I explain how the same chemical, indole, is responsible for the beautiful scent of jasmine and the foul odor of decay. She is fascinated. "It's all chemistry," she says, holding a sprig of rosemary to her nose. "Life and death, just different arrangements of the same basic elements." At night, we sit and watch the dead city. The power is out across the entire grid, and without light pollution, the stars are a brilliant, breathtaking canopy. We talk about our past lives. She tells me about her late husband, a jazz musician. I tell her about my failed marriage, about the scent I designed for my wife that she never wore. These conversations feel like an act of defiance, a refusal to let our pasts be erased by the monstrous present. We are 2 people tending a garden at the end of the world, keeping the flame of humanity alive with stories and shared memories. But there is a tension here, a problem we both know we have to face. The garden is a sanctuary, but it is also a beacon. The powerful living scent of so many plants is a huge olfactory anomaly in a city of rot. So far, the dead, with their ground-level perspective, haven't been able to pinpoint the source. But what if they do? What if a breeze carries the scent downwards in just the right way? The garden that is keeping us alive could also be the thing that leads them right to our door. This full zombie story is not a peaceful one. The threat is always present, a low, rumbling bass note beneath the melody of our quiet existence. Day 20. My fears were realized today. We were on the edge of the roof looking down when we saw it. A large group of the dead, maybe 50 of them, had gathered at the base of our building. They weren't just milling about, they were agitated. Their heads were tilted upwards, sniffing the air, their groans taking on a hungry, searching quality. "The wind has shifted," Eleanor said, her voice grim. "It's blowing our scent straight down to them." We watched in horror as one of them, more persistent than the rest, began to claw at the front doors of the building. It was followed by another and another. They knew. They didn't know exactly where we were, but they knew that somewhere in this building was a source of powerful living scent, a feast. "The barricade on the 10th floor won't hold forever," I said, my voice tight with fear. "Not against that many." Eleanor looked at me, her face set and determined. then we have to reinforce it. And you, she said, a new intensity in her eyes, you have to do what you do best. You have to confuse them. You have to give them another scent to follow, a stronger one. She was right. My Geist note was a defensive tool. It was time to create an offensive one, a lure, a Judas scent. Something so powerfully, irresistibly alive that it would draw them away from the building. It was a desperate gamble. I would have to go down there, down among them. Day 21, 3 weeks. Today, I became a shepherd to a flock of monsters. I spent the night in my old lab at the library, which I had returned to for its resources, synthesizing the lure. It was the opposite of Geist note. I needed to create the ultimate perfume of life. I started with a synthetic base that mimicked the scent of human sweat. To this, I added a cocktail of aldehydes and ketones that are present in our breath. The masterstroke, however, was a highly concentrated tincture of synthetic blood hemoglobin. The scent of fresh blood is the most powerful attractant for any predator. The resulting concoction was unsettling. It didn't smell bad, not in a rotten way. It smelled intensely, unnervingly alive. It was the scent of a frightened, bleeding animal, the scent of perfect prey. I created a delayed release system using a series of chemical-soaked sponges placed inside a bag with small perforations. The scent would leak out slowly, creating a trail. My plan was to lead them to the river, to draw the entire herd away from Eleanor's garden and into the fast-moving water. I descended to the streets at dawn, cloaked in my Geist note. The herd was still at the base of the apartment building, a seething mass of hunger. I opened the lure bag a block away. The effect was instantaneous. Dozens of heads snapped in my direction. A chorus of hungry moans echoed through the street. They had a new scent, a better one, and the hunt was on. I began to walk, the bag leaving a potent trail behind me. They followed, the entire herd. It was the most terrifying thing I have ever experienced. A parade of the dead, and I was their silent, invisible leader. I walked for what felt like an eternity, never looking back, just focusing on the path to the river. The survival horror narration of my own life had reached its terrifying climax. I reached the waterfront, the wide, gray expanse of the river stretching out before me. I threw the lure bag as far as I could into the current. It landed with a splash and began to drift away. The herd followed without hesitation. They poured over the embankment, a cascade of rotting bodies, driven by a singular primal need. They fell into the water, their grasping hands reaching for a source that was already gone, their bodies swept away by the current. I watched until the last one was gone. The street was silent, empty. I had done it. I sank to my knees, shaking, the adrenaline leaving me as weak as a newborn. I had saved the garden. I had saved Eleanor. I had weaponized my art and won. But as I looked at the empty street, a new, cold dread washed over me. I had drawn the attention of a huge herd. But what had drawn them to the city in the first place? What was the source of the original plague scent? And what other, larger herds were out there, still hunting? I had won the battle, but the war for survival was far from over. Day 22. The aftermath of the river incident left an eerie quiet around our building. The immediate threat was gone, but the sense of security was fragile. Eleanor and I worked in the garden with a new, unspoken urgency. We were safe, for now, but we were on an island, and the sea of the dead was vast. The experience changed me. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a strategist. My knowledge of scent was not just a defense mechanism. It was a tool that could shape our environment, control the enemy, and create safe zones. This realization was both empowering and terrifying. The burden of our continued existence rested squarely on my shoulders. Eleanor, ever the pragmatist, saw it too. "You need a proper laboratory, Alistair," she said one afternoon, wiping sweat from her brow. That makeshift setup in the library is not enough. You need to be able to produce your materials in larger quantities, and you need to be able to research. She was right. My Geist note and the lure were products of desperation. To truly understand this plague, to have any hope of creating a more permanent solution, I needed a dedicated space. I needed my tools. I needed my atelier back. The thought of returning to my studio, the place where this nightmare began, was daunting. It was filled with memories of a life that was gone forever. But it was also the most well-equipped place I could imagine for the work that needed to be done. It had ventilation, chemical storage, precise measuring equipment, and my entire library of raw scent molecules. "I can't leave you here alone," I told her. "The herd could come back." She smiled, a rare, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I'm not asking you to leave me. I'm telling you that we need to move your operation here. We need to bring your laboratory to the garden." The idea was audacious. It would mean venturing back to my studio, which was several blocks away, and transporting delicate, dangerous chemicals through a city of monsters. A single dropped vial could be a disaster. But she was right. Combining her fortress and my laboratory was our best chance. Day 24. We spent 2 days planning the heist. We mapped out the safest route, timing our movements for the quietest part of the day, just after dawn. Eleanor, it turned out, was a master of logistics. She had a collection of old hiking backpacks and a sturdy dolly she used for moving large bags of soil. "My husband and I used to hike the Appalachian Trail," she said, her voice soft with memory. "You learn how to pack efficiently. Every ounce matters." She also revealed another secret of her sanctuary. In a locked storage closet on the roof, she had a small arsenal. Her husband had been a collector. There was a hunting rifle with a scope, a shotgun, and 2 handguns with several boxes of ammunition. "I never liked them," she said, her face grim as she checked the chamber of the rifle. But Charles insisted. He was a bit of a pessimist. She looked at me. "I can't go with you. Someone has to keep watch from here. But you should be armed." I had never held a gun in my life. My hands were trained for the delicate work of pipettes and beakers, not the cold, heavy steel of a weapon. She gave me a crash course on the rooftop, teaching me how to load, aim, and fire one of the handguns. The sound of the first shot was deafening, a shocking violation of the city's silence. We both froze, waiting, but there was no immediate reaction from the street below. "Use it only if your scent trick fails," she warned. "A sound is a dinner bell, just like a smell." The next morning, I set out. I was armed with a pistol, a backpack, and the dolly. I was cloaked in Geist note, a ghost on a mission. The city felt different this time, more predatory. Or perhaps I was just more aware of the danger. Every dark alley, every open doorway was a potential ambush. This was no longer just a post-apocalyptic survival story I was living through. It was an active infiltration. Day 25. My studio was as I had left it. A layer of dust covered everything, a fine gray powder that seemed to be the official color of the new world. The air was stale, thick with the ghosts of old perfumes. For a moment, I was overwhelmed by a sense of loss so profound it almost drove me to my knees. This place had been my entire world. Now it was just a resource to be plundered. I worked with a frantic, desperate energy. I packed my most valuable materials first, the rare absolutes, the synthetic animalics, the key aldehydes and esters. I carefully loaded boxes of glassware, my digital scale, and my most important research notes. The dolly was soon piled high with the essential components of my craft. As I was about to leave, my eyes fell on a small, elegant bottle on my main workbench. It was the perfume I had been working on when the world ended, the one for the bride who wanted to smell of sea salt and new beginnings. I picked it up. It smelled of hope and a future that would never happen. On a foolish, sentimental impulse, I tucked it into my pocket. The journey back was a nightmare. The dolly was cumbersome and loud, its wheels rattling over the cracked pavement. Every sound was a potential death sentence. Several times I had to stop, hiding in a doorway as a lone sniffer shuffled past, drawn by the noise. My Geist note held, but it felt tenuous, as if the sound was competing with the scent for their limited attention. I was halfway back when it happened. One of the dolly's wheels caught on a piece of rubble, and the whole thing tipped. A box of glass beakers slid off and shattered on the ground. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent street. From all around, heads turned. A dozen of them. Their groans started, low and hungry. They knew the source of the sound. They began to move towards me, their pace quickening. The Geist note wasn't enough to deter them from such a precise, loud noise. I pulled the pistol from my belt, my hands shaking. Eleanor's words echoed in my head. Only if it fails. It was failing. I aimed at the closest one and fired. The recoil was a shock, the sound an explosion. The creature fell. But the sound of the shot drew even more of them. I was surrounded. Day 27. I don't know how I survived. The next few minutes were a blur of terror and adrenaline. I fired again and again, the sounds of the shots bringing more and more of the dead. I abandoned the dolly, grabbing only the backpack with my most critical research, and I ran. I ran for my life, a perfumer turned reluctant gunman, leaving a trail of noise and death behind me. I made it back to the apartment building, my lungs burning, my body screaming in protest. I scrambled up the stairs, not stopping until I reached the 10th floor barricade, pounding on the door. Eleanor let me in, her face pale with worry. She had heard the shots. I gasped, leaning against the wall. It's gone. Equipment can be replaced, she said, her hand on my shoulder. You can't. We had failed. My lab was lost, scattered on a dead street. My hope of synthesizing a better solution, of truly fighting back, was gone. I spent the next day in a state of deep depression, sitting on the edge of the roof watching the city. I had risked everything and lost. Eleanor, in her quiet wisdom, gave me space. She brought me water and food, but didn't press me to talk. In the evening, she came and sat beside me. When my Charles died, she said softly, I thought my world had ended. My garden, this garden, it felt pointless. He was the one who loved my tomatoes the most. She paused, looking at the vibrant green plants around us. But the world keeps turning. The plants keep growing. They don't know about our sorrows. They just know about the sun. You have to be like the garden, Alistair. You have to keep growing. Her words, simple and profound, broke through my despair. She was right. I had lost my tools, but I hadn't lost my knowledge. I still had my mind, my nose, and the small, vital supply of materials I had managed to save in my backpack. As I sat there, a new idea began to form. A wild, audacious idea born from Eleanor's words. I couldn't rely on complex, synthesized chemicals anymore. But what if I didn't have to? What if the answer wasn't in a lab, but right here, in this garden? Plants are the original perfumers. They create complex chemical compounds for defense, for attraction, for communication. What if, among Eleanor's herbs and flowers, there was a natural compound that could affect the dead? A scent that could not just repel them, but perhaps soothe them? Calm their aggressive hunting instincts? It was a long shot, a crazy, desperate theory, but it was a new direction, a new hope. Day 28, 4 weeks. A new chapter has begun. I am no longer just a perfumer. I am now Eleanor's apprentice. I am learning botany. I am learning the language of plants, not just their scents, but their very chemical makeup. We spend our days harvesting leaves, flowers, and roots. I have set up a small makeshift distillery using a pressure cooker and some copper tubing Eleanor had. It's primitive, but it works. I am extracting essential oils, creating tinctures, trying to isolate the core chemical compounds of her garden. I am searching for a new Geist note, a new lure, a new weapon, forged not from the chemicals of the old world, but from the living things that have survived it. I am a perfumer again, but my palette is no longer composed of molecules from a catalog. It is composed of rosemary, thyme, mint, and the rich, dark soil that gives them life. I have a new purpose. We have a new purpose. We are not just surviving anymore. We are fighting back, using the oldest sciences on Earth, botany and perfumery. We are the gardeners at the end of the world, and we are just getting started. Day 29. The work is slow, painstaking. Each day is a new experiment. I distill oil from Eleanor's rosemary bushes, noting its high camphor content. Could the sharp medicinal scent act as a neurological irritant to the infected? I create a tincture from her peppermint leaves, focusing on the menthol. Could a high concentration of it overwhelm their olfactory senses, effectively blinding them? Each theory must be tested. We devise a system. I create a scented lure, a small cloth pouch filled with the experimental compound, and lower it on a fishing line from the roof into the street below. We then watch for hours, observing the reaction of any passing sniffers. The results are mostly disappointing. The rosemary has a mild repellent effect, causing them to avoid the immediate area, but it's not strong enough to be reliable. The mint is barely noticed. Day after day, we meet with failure. But with each failure, I learn something new. I am creating a library of scents, cataloging their effects on the dead. It's the most important work of my life, conducted on a rooftop with a pressure cooker and a fishing rod. Despite the grim nature of our research, there is a strange peace in the routine. We work, we eat, we talk. We are a small, self-contained world, a two-person civilization. Eleanor's pragmatism is the perfect foil to my often frantic creativity. She keeps me grounded. "Patience, Alistair," she says when I grow frustrated. "It took me 3 years to get these blueberries to fruit. Nature works on its own schedule." One evening, she brings me a small, withered-looking plant in a pot. It has no leaves, just a tangle of gray roots clinging to a piece of bark. "I've been trying to get this to bloom for 5 years," she says, her voice filled with a botanist's reverence. "It's a ghost orchid, Dendrophylax lindeni. It's notoriously difficult to cultivate. It only blooms at night, and its scent, well, it's supposed to be magical." I had, of course, read about the ghost orchid. It was a legend in the perfume world. Its scent was said to be so complex, so ethereal, that it had never been successfully synthesized. It was the holy grail of floral notes. "Why are you showing it to me now?" I ask. "Because," she says, pointing to a tiny, pale green bud, no bigger than my fingernail. "I think it's finally going to bloom." Day 31. We watch the ghost orchid like anxious parents. The bud swells slowly, almost imperceptibly, each day. The anticipation is a welcome distraction from the constant, low-level dread of our existence. It feels like a miracle, this tiny, stubborn spark of life in a world of death. During the day, our experiments continue. I begin to combine scents, thinking that perhaps a complex accord is needed, not a single note. I mix the sharp scent of pine needles with the bitter aroma of marigold leaves. The combination seems to make the dead agitated, confused. They approach the lure, sniff at it, and then wander away, as if unable to process the conflicting information. It's a partial success. A confusion scent could be useful. It could buy us time, create a diversion. But it's not the breakthrough I'm hoping for. My thoughts keep returning to the original plague scent, that sweet floral rot. It was a complex accord. To fight it, I feel I need something equally complex, something that doesn't just mask or repel, but communicates. A scent that can speak to the damaged, primal part of their brains. As I work, I find myself thinking more and more about the nature of the virus. It rewrites the brain, leaving only the hunt. But what if it's not a total erasure? What if, deep inside the infected mind, some remnant of humanity is left? A ghost in the machine, a memory, a flicker of who they used to be. Scent is the sense most closely tied to memory. A single whiff of a forgotten perfume can transport you back decades. What if there is a scent that could trigger a memory in the infected? A scent so deeply ingrained in the human experience that it could momentarily override the virus. The smell of baking bread, freshly cut grass, a mother's skin. It's a wild, romantic notion, a perfumer's dream in the middle of a nightmare. But the idea takes root in my mind, as stubborn and persistent as the ghost orchid's bud. Day 33. It happened last night. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the garden, Eleanor called my name, her voice a hushed whisper of awe. "Alistair, look." The ghost orchid had bloomed. It was an otherworldly thing, a pale, luminous flower that seemed to float in the twilight. It looked like a small leaping frog, its petals a ghostly white. And the scent was indescribable. It was nothing like any flower I had ever smelled. It was a shimmering, complex fragrance that changed with every breath. It had notes of ripe apple, of night-blooming jasmine, of cool, damp earth. It was beautiful, but there was something else in it, a strange, calming, almost sedative quality. We sat before it in silence for nearly an hour, simply breathing it in. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated beauty, a jewel dropped in the mud of our existence. As the night deepened, we noticed something strange. The roof, which was usually silent save for the whisper of the wind, had a new sound, a low, rhythmic hum. We crept to the edge of the roof and looked down. The street below was filled with them, hundreds of them, more than I had ever seen in one place. They weren't agitated. They weren't trying to get into the building. They were standing perfectly still, their heads tilted upwards, their bodies unnaturally calm. They were listening to the scent of the orchid. The scent was flowing down from the roof, a gentle, invisible waterfall. And it was pacifying them. It was a siren song for the dead. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. The orchid's scent wasn't just calming. It was resonant. It was vibrating on a frequency that the infected brain could understand. It was overriding the hunt. "What is in that flower?" I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes wide. "I have no idea. Its chemical composition is a mystery. That's why it's never been synthesized." I looked from the serene, listening horde below to the single magical flower. A mystery, a cure, a weapon. A single, impossible bloom held the key to everything. And we had to have more of it. Day 35. The ghost orchid's bloom is ephemeral. It will last for a few days at most. We have a very small window. We cannot rely on this one flower. We have to analyze it, understand it, and replicate it. This is the most important challenge of my life. My makeshift distillery is not precise enough for this work. I need a real laboratory. I need the equipment I lost. I have to go back for it. There is no other choice. This time, there will be no dolly. I will take a backpack and make as many trips as necessary. I will bring back my lab, piece by piece. Eleanor agrees. The sight of the pacified horde has convinced her that the risk is justified. She has given me the hunting rifle. "You are a better shot now," she said, her voice firm. "And this is a mission we cannot afford to fail." I have spent today preparing. I have coated my clothes in the pine and marigold confusion scent. My theory is that it will make me less noticeable, an olfactory blur, while the orchid scent keeps the horde in a state of relative calm. It's a plan built on a series of wild, unproven theories. It could all go horribly wrong. As I stand here on the eve of my departure, I can smell the ghost orchid on the night air. It's a scent of impossible hope. For 5 weeks, I have been a survivor, a scavenger, a ghost. Tomorrow, I become a thief, stealing back the tools of my old life in order to build a new future. This full zombie story, this survival horror narration, has reached its turning point. Everything that happens next, for me, for Eleanor, and perhaps for the whole world, depends on what I can salvage from the ruins of my past. The perfumer is going back to work. Day 36. The city under the influence of the ghost orchid is a different kind of hell. It's quieter, but in many ways more menacing. The dead are still there, hundreds of them, but they are languid, passive. They stand in the streets, swaying gently, their heads tilted up towards our roof like pale, withered flowers seeking a ghostly sun. They are a silent, waiting army. My confusion scent seems to work. As I move among them, they register my presence, turning their heads slowly, but their movements are sluggish, their usual aggressive sniffing replaced by a dull, placid curiosity. The orchid's song is the dominant note in the air, and my scent is just minor, discordant static they can't be bothered to investigate. It's a nerve-wracking journey. Walking through a sea of calm monsters is somehow more terrifying than evading a hunting pack. The potential for them to wake up at any moment is a constant, screaming tension in the back of my mind. I reach the site where I had abandoned the dolly. Miraculously, most of the equipment was still there, scattered but largely intact. The street was littered with the bodies of the creatures I had shot days ago, a grim reminder of my last failed attempt. I filled my backpack with the most critical items, my gas chromatographs detector, a box of sample vials, and my most precious research notebooks. The journey back was agonizingly slow. The weight of the equipment was immense, and I had to move carefully to avoid making any sudden noises. Every step was a calculated risk. But I made it. I returned to the rooftop, my body aching, but my spirit soaring. I had the first pieces of my lab. One trip down, many more to go. Day 38. I have become a creature of the dawn and dusk. I make 2 trips a day, one in the morning, one in the evening, when the light is low and the orchid scent seems to be at its strongest. The backpack is always brutally heavy, filled with glassware, electronics, and chemical containers. My body is covered in bruises, my muscles screaming in protest. But with each successful trip, our laboratory on the roof grows. We have cleared a space in the small greenhouse Eleanor uses for seedlings. I have a workbench now, power from a series of car batteries Eleanor had salvaged, and my precious equipment is slowly being reassembled. Eleanor stands guard during my excursions, watching from the roof with the rifle, my guardian angel. Her faith in this mad endeavor is the fuel that keeps me going. We are a team, fighting a war on 2 fronts. She guards our fortress, and I build the weapon that might just win the war. The ghost orchid, meanwhile, is beginning to fade. The luminous quality of its petals is dimming, and its magical scent is growing fainter. We have maybe 2 or 3 days left of its calming influence. The clock is ticking. The pressure is immense. The fate of our sanctuary and our impossible dream of a cure rests on my ability to reassemble my lab and analyze the orchid's scent before it's gone forever. Day 40. The lab is functional. It's a Frankenstein's monster of salvaged parts, held together with duct tape and prayer, but it works. The gas chromatograph hums to life, its gentle word the most beautiful sound in the world. This machine is the key. It can separate a scent into its individual chemical components, identifying each molecule. It can translate the poetry of the orchid's perfume into the hard, cold language of science. The procedure is incredibly delicate. I need a sample of the scent itself, the volatile organic compounds it releases into the air. I construct a small glass dome to place over the flower, with a port connected to a syringe. It's a tense, heart-stopping moment as I capture a sample of the air around the bloom. I have one shot at this. The flower is too fragile to survive a second attempt. I inject the air sample into the chromatograph, and we wait. The machine begins its work, analyzing the molecular structure of the scent, charting it as a series of peaks on my laptop screen. Eleanor and I stand side by side, watching the data scroll by, hardly daring to breathe. The graph is unlike anything I have ever seen. It's incredibly complex, with dozens of compounds, many of which I recognize. But there is one peak, one molecule that is completely off the charts. It's a complex alkaloid that is not present in any chemical library I have access to. It is, for all intents and purposes, a brand new, undiscovered molecule. And it is the dominant compound in the orchid scent. This is it, the active ingredient, the calming agent. We have found the ghost in the machine. Can you replicate it? Eleanor asks, her voice barely a whisper. I look at the complex chemical structure displayed on the screen. It's a daunting, intricate puzzle of carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen atoms. I don't know, I answer honestly. It's beyond anything I've ever tried to synthesize. But I have to try. I can see the pathway. I have the raw materials I salvaged. It might be possible. It is the Everest of my profession. A challenge that, in the old world, a team of chemists would spend years and millions of dollars to solve. I have to do it here, on a rooftop, at the end of the world, with salvaged equipment and a dying flower as my only guide. Day 41. The orchid is dead. We woke this morning to find its petals withered and brown, its scent completely gone. And as its calming song faded from the air, the city began to wake up. From the street below, the groans began again, louder and more aggressive than before. The horde is no longer pacified. They are hungry, and they remember. They remember the powerful, living scent of the garden that drew them here in the first place. They are once again clawing at the doors, their numbers seeming to have grown. Our window of peace has closed. I have been working non-stop for 24 hours, fueled by caffeine pills from an old first aid kit and sheer, terrifying adrenaline. The synthesis is a multi-stage process, each fraught with peril. A mistaken temperature, a miscalculation in measurement, and the entire batch could be ruined. Or worse, it could explode. Eleanor is by my side, a steady, calming presence. She reads the steps from my notes, prepares my solutions, and keeps watch on the growing horde below. We are a well-oiled machine, working against the dying of the light. As night falls, I reach the final stage, the precipitation of the final compound. I mix the last two reagents, my hands steady despite my utter exhaustion. The solution in the beaker turns cloudy, and then, slowly, a fine white powder begins to crystallize and settle at the bottom. I have done it. I have synthesized the ghost molecule. It's a tiny amount, maybe a few grams, but it's a start. It's proof. It's hope in a powdered form. Day 42. 6 weeks. The barricade on the 10th floor is groaning under the strain. The sounds of the horde are a constant, thunderous roar that travels up through the building's foundation. They are breaking through. We don't have much time. I have dissolved the synthesized powder in a solvent, creating a concentrated solution. I don't know the effective dosage. I don't know if it will work in the same way as the natural flower. There has been no time for testing. This is it. The final, desperate experiment. We have decided to turn the entire rooftop into a giant scent diffuser. We have run tubing from the greenhouse to the edge of the roof, connected to an atomizer powered by a car battery. We will blanket the street below in a fog of the synthesized orchid scent. It's all or nothing. As Eleanor makes the final preparations, I stand at the edge of the roof, looking down at the seething mass of the dead. It's a terrifying, mesmerizing sight. 42 days ago, I was a perfumer, a man who dealt in luxury and memory. Today, I am a soldier in a war no one else knows is being fought, a war of molecules and senses, a war for the soul of humanity fought with the scent of a ghost. Eleanor gives me a nod. It's time. I take a deep breath, the air thick with the smell of dust and fear. This is not the end of my story. I refuse to let it be. This is a new beginning. I flip the switch. This post-apocalyptic survival story, this zombie apocalypse audiobook of my life, is about to enter its next, most dangerous chapter. The scent of hope begins to mist into the air.